Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Shadows and Ink podcast. And today our guest is Christopher Miklos, and we're going to be talking about pulp horror and his book Tick Town. So I'm going to turn it over to you now and let you introduce yourself. So take it away.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. As you said, my name is Christopher Miklos, and my debut novel, Tick Town, was just released from Castle Bridge Media. I'm super excited about it. It's about um, a small town in rural Wisconsin, a small tourist town that gets overrun by a band of giant mutant ticks. So it's pretty straightforward, kind of a propulsive, fun pulp horror paperback and on Kindle as well. And I'm just very excited to have my first book out there.
That sounds interesting. So tell us a little bit about it and tell us what inspired Tick Town. So, what influenced you to write a pulp horror novel?
Well, I've made a couple of movies in the last 6 years. I'm a filmmaker and an author. I've made two low budget, micro budget horror films. And around the time of COVID, like many people, it was hard to keep doing that sort of thing. And so I wanted to, after years of thinking about it, try my hand at a novel. I had recently read the book Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix and Will Erickson, which is a survey of 70s and 80s pulp horror paperbacks. And it introduced me to a whole genre of book that I had previously not been familiar with. And so I started reading some of these books, in particular, the books of Guyan Smith, like Night of the Crabs and The Slime Beast. And they just had these wild, crazy plot lines, these outsized heroes, these ridiculous situations, and I just kind of fell in love with them. And so when I decided it was time to write a novel, I decided I wanted to write something like that. And so I set about trying to figure out what a good you know, what a good kind of creature feature I wanted to do. I always loved those 50s and 60s sci-fi movies like Them or Mantis and stuff like that. And so I thought I would try and combine my love of those old movies with my newfound love of these pulp horror paperbacks, and I came up with Tick Town.
Oh, that sounds like fun. So, do you have new favorite now that you're into the horror books? And did you have a favorite pulp movie?
Well, the one that I have loved since as a kid is the 1954 Big Ant movie Them. And in fact, for my book launch, we're screening a on the ultra screen at a local theater here in Madison, Wisconsin. We're going to screen Them. It's open to the public, and basically, if people bring in a paperback copy of Ticktown, they get into the movie for free. And then we're going to do a book signing and reception afterwards. And I chose Them because it's very similar in style and tone to my book, and it's always been one of my favorites, so I thought it would be a cool way to kind of kick off the book.
Yeah, them is a classic, and that's a cool way to do a book launch too, by the way.
Thanks.
Okay, so how did your filmmaking experience help shape the writing of your novel?
Well, that's interesting actually, because in addition to my own movies, I've written several spec scripts, which I've tried desperately to market and get out to managers with very limited success. Um, but when I started writing scripts, of course, like many people, I had no idea how to do it. And so I had these like dense, ridiculously long description packed paragraphs and so on and so forth. And then as I wrote more and I learned more about script writing, I learned that you really need to have to call back the language and have a real economy with the words. And I found that that's been a great a gift to my writing of fiction as well. And it lends itself very much to the pulp horror genre. Um, Short, direct sentences, don't dwell too much on the big descriptive paragraphs and just keep that action propulsive and moving forward. And so I took a lot of that from my consciously from my script writing. Unconsciously, it's funny. A couple of my early reviews have noted that the book reads very cinematically. One review pointed out a scene in which he says something to the effect of the scene reads like the author was writing it in slow motion, basically. And I'd never really thought of it that way, but I realized that sometimes I do think cinematically because of my film background, and so I describe things the way I want to see them in a movie, and that apparently has come through in the writing as well. So some of it's conscious, some of it's unconscious, but I think it's had a big impact on my writing.
Yeah, I get that slow motion reference. I mean, as a fan of action movies, you always have that slow mo uh, thing in the heroes. Yeah. So why did you settle on ticks for your pulp horror monster as opposed to something maybe more classic like spiders?
Well, I think it's because the two reasons, let me say. One is I did look back, especially at literature, and tried to figure out if there was something that hadn't been done to death. And spiders have very much been done to death. Ants have very much been done to death. I mentioned Night of the Crabs by Guy Smith. There's a ton of crab books out there. And so part of me really wanted to do something that was going to be different than what was already out there. But then on top of that, I'm located in Wisconsin, and ticks are a big problem in rural Wisconsin. In fact, in our state, when it comes to like the woodlands, they're the number one killer out there, not because they can cleave you in half and suck out all your blood, but because they carry disease and that sort of thing with them. But I thought it would be more fun in literature to have them cleave you in half and suck out your blood. And so I thought it would be fun to go with giant mutant ticks, and I hadn't even thought about when the book would come out. Of course, when you're writing, you don't think about that. But the fact that it's coming out in summer, and ticks aren't just an issue in Wisconsin; they're an issue anywhere there's woodland or rural area. And so it just turned out to be a great fit for a summer release.
Yeah, the ticks are a bit of a problem here in Nova Scotia too. So yeah, it's a middle.
Yeah,
It's a good time to release a tick book in the middle of tick season. Yeah.
it is indeed.
Okay, so what do you think are essential elements that make a good creature feature?
Well, for me, the things that I wanted to bring to the story is uh, one. I think you need to have fun with it. I mean, creature features are fun, broad, often action-packed stories, and so I think some of what I found missing when I was reading some of those. Um, Paperbacks of the 70s and 80s that I like so much, even though they're so crazy and so gonzo that they end up being fun. I didn't always get the sense that they were meant to be broad and fun and kind of like entertaining. And so I wanted to bring personally, because the creature feature genre is so nostalgic for me. I wanted to bring some of that nostalgic fun to it. And so there's definitely an element of I try not to, in the writing of the book, I tried not to wink at the audience, and I tried not to be meta or that sort of thing. But I wanted situations and characters to be recognizable for the reader. And so I wanted to bring that fun to it. I also think you need to find in a creature feature something familiar, but that yet can become unfamiliar, and I don't even know what the word is, the grotesquity, in its size. And so I'm writing a second book now in which the creature is not something that's particularly recognizable. And frankly, I'm finding that harder to do because there's something. I think there's something that's engaging and interesting about having something familiar that isn't particularly threatening, that becomes threatening. And I think that's important for creature feature. And so I'm kind of working on working around that a little bit in my next book. But with ticks, I've found from early reviews and from my ARC readers and that sort of thing, everyone has an opinion of ticks, and so it makes a good fit for creature feature.
Yeah, I would think so. So, did anything surprise you when you were writing the book? Was it smooth sailing, or did you run into issues and troubles?
Honestly, from a writing perspective, it was my first time trying to write a full blown novel. It's a short novel. It's only about 200 pages, something in the range of 54,000 words. So it's not super long, um, but it was the longest thing that I've written, and that was an interesting challenge. I found. For whatever reason, when you write short fiction, it's easier to just kind of edit as you go, and you don't have to just keep that momentum going to get everything down on the page. And I found that with writing a novel, that if you try to edit as you go, at least for me, or if you try to be too censor yourself too much before you get it on the page, it really slows you down. And so it took a lot of discipline to just write, kind of throw it all out there, kind of slop all the clay down onto the mat, and then have the discipline to go back later and do all the pulling it off and rearranging and moving chapters around and that sort of thing. So uh, writing a novel for the first time, I found that that was a significant challenge, but also an exciting one. It turns out that I had a lot of fun doing that. I loved going in and finding, like, for example, I don't know, you probably don't want to get too far into the writing process, but after I had my first couple drafts written, I went in and I took each chapter and I set up each chapter in an Excel spreadsheet with a little, like, line about how, what happens in the chapter, and then I color coded them, whether it was more exposition, or whether it was suspense, or whether it was full blown action and gore. And then I kind of looked at it and said, you know what, this needs to be moved around a little bit because there's too many chunks of time where it's just not enough action. And so I need a some sort of set piece, to break up some of the exposition. And so that was a real fun process. It was a real learning process, but I actually loved doing it. It just took me a while to figure it out.
Yeah, I was just editing some of my stuff today as well, and yeah, I had to throw in some action bits in this long section of dialogue. It's like, no, that's way that's gotta be edited. Yeah. So, what do you enjoy most about writing, especially writing pulp horror?
Well, I compare it to, there's three things, that I've written that have been substantial. There's the movies I've written for myself. There are spec scripts that I've written to try to market, elsewhere, and then there's this pulp horror novel. The books that I, or I'm sorry, the scripts that I've written to make myself, you really have to excuse me, you have to hem yourself in. You're constantly thinking when you're writing something like that, okay, I have to film this. So every scene, every special effect, that sort of thing, I really need to know how I'm going to pull it off. And I have to think in terms of budget and cast size and all that sort of thing. So you really have a fence around you that, you have to kind of work within if it's going to be a micro budget film. Then you start to write a spec script that you want to, maybe market to a studio or to a producer with more money than you have to spend. And so you start to think, okay, I can do some more fun things, but I can't get carried away because Marvel's not going to buy my script, and so it's not going to be unlimited budget to make a movie. But then when you sit down and you write a novel, it's just like the world opens up for you. You can write any action, you can write any size and scope. You can go from an intimate little scene in the woods to helicopters flying in and blasting away at the pesticide plant or whatever, what have you. And it's just fun writing at a scope that I usually have not written at before because I'm so hemmed in thinking of the logistics and the budget. And so that's been the really delightful thing, is to just kind of let the imagination run wild and have realize that I can put anything on the page that I can think up, and that's really liberating, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. So, you've also written some nonfiction about horror, including movie reviews.
Yeah.
So how different is that writing experience from fiction writing?
Well, it's hugely different, and maybe it's just because I've written, excuse me, nonfiction type of stuff my entire life. I've always been a writer. I was writing movie reviews from a very young age, and then in most of my career, which I've worked for many years in politics and advocacy, I worked in marketing. Um, I was always writing, whether it be news releases or ads or videos and that sort of thing, which all have a very set format, a set you're trying to impart information. You're maybe working towards a goal to get someone to do something, what have you. Whereas fiction, which I've beyond the scripts, I've only really been writing prose for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. It's just a whole different world, and it's about drawing someone in and telling a broader story. And frankly, I wasn't sure I could do it, because it was just something that I was so unused to, and I had exercised the muscle for nonfiction so much, and I liked writing that. And I think you can do some really fun, entertaining stuff in nonfiction as well, but fiction was just a totally different cat. And so I wasn't sure I could do it. I'd written several um, short stories and pieces like that in the last few years that gave me enough confidence that, oh, okay, it was getting enough interest from various magazines or sites or whatever, that people seemed to respond to it. They liked it, and so it gave me that kind of confidence to go out and try something longer. But it's just a whole different mindset. It's a whole different kind of creativity when you're creating a world and creating characters, as opposed to almost, for lack of a better word, reporting on characters or reporting on something that you've seen, and offering an opinion on it. And I found it very intimidating, and I found it very, when I was done with the novel, I didn't have enough distance to have any sense of whether it was any good or not. I mean, I knew I was happy to have gotten through it and happy to have, got something that I enjoyed reading. But to be honest with you, um, I was intimidated to send it to literary agents, to send it to publishers, just because I had no sense of whether the craft was at a level that was, acceptable. And so that was like everything else. It was a whole big learning experience for me.
Yeah, well, it doesn't get any easier.
Oh, really? I thought now it's just, runaway fun and,
No, no,
and
no, you're
frolicking.
pretty
No.
much intimidated every
Oh,
time you write a novel, so
oh no. Oh no.
Okay, so, what is it about the horror genre that appeals to you as a writer and a filmmaker?
Well, I used the word nostalgia before, and for me, horror is it's a very nostalgic genre. When I was, when I was real young, I used to a lot on the weekends stay with my grandparents. So my parents would go out, and my sisters were older, and so I was usually spending a Saturday night or a Friday night over at my grandparents, and my grandmother would always let me watch with her. It was back. We're talking what ways back, pre-cable, when you got all your movies on the local superstation, whether it was WGN out of Chicago, or TBS or whatever the early superstations were, and they'd have those horror hosts, those crazy, undead horror hosts or whoever they were. And my grandmother would always let me watch, those movies with her, and they were always these old, movies, and many of them that she was letting me watch were very, you know very gentle movies, like the early Universal movies, or even better, like horror comedies with like Bob Hope, or the Abbott and Costello movies, or those sorts of things. And I just absolutely loved them, and they were kind of my gateway into actual, you know horror movies and horror, and then horror books is when I got more into reading. um, and I think even today, there are authors that I love, and there are movies that I love that are completely divorced from those kinds of movies that I grew up watching and I got into when I was young. But there's still this nostalgia factor that always brings me back, um, uh, from that kernel that was planted when I was a kid with those old kind of, goofy movies, to now, even the more intense stuff that you watch or that I like. just a sense of nostalgia that I can't get over, that I go back to over and over again.
Yeah, so what is your favorite subgenre of horror? Is it pulp horror, or do you like something like psychological or even the extreme stuff?
Well, I'm not that into the extreme stuff. For example, I have found recently that I really, really like this pulp horror stuff. Since I started reading it, authors like I mentioned Guy Smith and um, uh, Graham Masterton and Ramsey Campbell and Sean Hudson and authors like that. I've really, really enjoyed their stuff. I also very much have a very soft spot for horror comedy. I still love horror comedy. I love those old horror comedy movies. Movies like that are done right today. I love those movies as well, and I love to read stuff that has a you know some mix of horror and humor. A lot of my short fiction is like that. It's very overt like that. It's definitely horror comedy. But those are the two things I would say that I enjoy reading and watching the most: the kind of the pulpy, kind of big, ridiculous stuff, and then also the horror comedy. So that's not to say, I would still say probably that if I could sit down with Edgar Allan Poe and read something of his, that is a wonderful way to spend an evening. I love authors and screenwriters like Richard Matheson. He's one of my favorite authors out there. But if I had to choose a subgenre, I'd say pulp horror is where I'm at these days.
Yeah, I like a good horror comedy myself. There's a lot of good ones out there. I mean, Shaun of the Dead, of course, is one of the more recent ones that,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, so who are some of the filmmakers and writers that you admire or have offered you encouragement?
Well, that's something that I actually love to talk about because I have been incredibly grateful to a handful of them. So I'm just going to mention a few. But when I when I made my first feature film, The Nursery, which came out back in 2018, I kind of impulsively reached out to a filmmaker who had a big impact on me because I loved his movies, and he he came from a low budget background, and he had gone to school here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from. And so I kind of impulsively reached out to Stuart Gordon, who made movies like Reanimator and um, Castle Freak and movies like that. And I basically just said, hey, I'm a novice filmmaker. I've got my first movie coming out. I just wanted you to know you were an inspiration. I really appreciate all your work. And he generously got back to me, gave me some very, nice words of encouragement. And that just meant a lot to me, that someone who was so accomplished and was such a, huge name in cult horror would actually take the time to get back to someone who just randomly reached out to him. But then when I wrote Ticktown, I've been absolutely flabbergasted because I did the same thing with some of the horror authors who had been such an inspiration to me, specifically in getting into pulp horror. And so I reached out to Graham Masterton, who wrote The Manitou and The Djinn and books like that. And he immediately wrote back to me with some, words of congratulations and some advice and, encouragement, which I, took very warmly. But then even better than that, I reached out to the legendary Ramsey Campbell, um, and again impulsively asked him if he'd be willing to read Ticktown and give me his thoughts, or if he liked it, give me a blurb. And he wrote back and basically said, yes, I will try to, what's your deadline? I gave him a deadline, and he met it by like 2 weeks and gave me a wonderful blurb that's adorning the back of the book. And then ditto for Sean Hudson, who's one of those great pulp paperback writers from the 70s and 80s. He's best known for Slugs, and um, he not only responded to me, he gave me a fantastic blurb that we've been using in marketing. And he's been, we kind of write back and forth, and he's been I like telling those stories because it's just amazing to me that these legendary figures are so generous with their time and their encouragement. and it's just, I find it remarkable. I'm not a young writer. I'm coming to this later in life, but I am a new writer, and so the fact that they would take the time not only to respond with some pleasantries, but in the case of a couple of them actually read the work and take the time to give me blurbs, and it's just been remarkable to me, and it makes me admire them even more.
Yeah, I found that most authors are pretty generous with their time and their encouragement as well. Um, so, what's your favorite thing about filmmaking, and what are some of the films you've worked on?
Um, so I've written and directed two feature films. One's called The Nursery. It came out in 2018, and one is called The Headmistress, which came out in 2023. And they're both, micro budget, independent horror films. You can find them, anywhere you get your streaming entertainment. You can buy or rent them anywhere. I always try to send people to Tubi because um, it's a ad based medium, so they don't have to pay for it. But you can check them out there. I really, the process of actually making the movie is definitely the highlight of the process. Those, in my case, the 13 days we spent actually shooting the nursery, or the 11 or 12 days we spent actually shooting the headmistress, are it's such a wild, crazy, whirlwind of a period, because you only have so much money, you only have the cast for so long, you might only have the location for so long, and you basically just have to, at our budget level, you don't go back for reshoots, so you basically got to get it all on film, or in our case, on digital video, at that time. So for example, our movie The Headmistress, which came out in 2023, we had gotten access to an abandoned nunnery in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. It had been built in the 50s. It was this great, amazing structure. It was two buildings. It might have been haunted. We have no evidence of that, but it should have been haunted because it was just crazy, creepy. It had these cabinets, these huge cabinets that people could fit into, that locked from the inside, not the outside. We could never figure that out, why these cabinets were locking from the inside. Um, Really just a weird place. So my co-director Jay Sapiro and I and a couple members of the crew and the entire cast moved into this nunnery for 12 days, and we lived there and we shot there, and it was like going to summer camp. We were all hanging out, and it was the time of your life. We just had such a fun time. And so I would say that's the when you go to edit, when you are trying to wrestle with the music, when you're at our budget level doing the special effects, that can be a real grind. But that those amazing days of shooting the movie itself are just some of the most wonderful memories I have. And I love shooting, and the rest I can take or leave.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you feel like that when you're editing or marketing your books too. So,
That's true.
would you like to make Tick Town into a film someday?
I would love to make Ticktown into a film. People have asked me, oh, do you think now you've got the book, you'll go make it? And it's, you know, where I am today as a filmmaker, it's not something that I could make right now, unless someone stepped up with a serious budget enhancement for me. But I think it would be honestly, it's as I said earlier when we were talking about the inspiration, it's very much inspired by these big bug creature feature sci-fi films, as well as these paperbacks, and I do agree with some of the people who've written that it's written very cinematically, and I think frankly it would make a just an awesome movie. I mean, it's basically ready made for that. If I had the opportunity to do it, I would absolutely do it. And if any of your listeners would wants to option the book or anything like that, they're certainly welcome to contact me. But uh, you know, I think we're at a period now in movie making. I was just talking about this with someone the last couple of weeks, where not just now, but over the last 10, 15 years, you can make movies like this with credible creatures, and that suspension of disbelief is is sublime because you can see them. I mean, I remember the first time I saw um, Jurassic Park, and my jaw just dropped because it was like, oh my god, there's dinosaurs on the screen with humans, and it was jaw dropping. But where we've come since then to now with what you can do and visually, you know, make it seem like these things are real is just remarkable. And so I think I definitely think there's a Ticktown movie out there. It's just it's going to be uh, up to someone to step up and make it.
Oh, you never know. A lot of
You never know.
independent authors are getting movie deals these days. So yeah.
Yes. Keep those fingers crossed.
So what's your next project?
So the next thing I'm working on right now is it's another pulp horror novel, and it's based on a cryptid type legend, local legend here. Um, as I mentioned, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm about an hour's drive from a lake called Devil's Lake, and there's a legend of a Nessie type of creature that lives in Devil's Lake. But it's a pretty it's a pretty threadbare legend. Like there's very little out there about it, and it's very undeveloped. It kind of it it's kind of mixed in with some Native American legends, and so I've been interested in that. I've been developing that, not necessarily as a direct, you know, it's not like it's not like the monster from Devil's Lake, but I'm kind of using that as inspiration to do something very similar. And I've been having a ball writing that as well. There are some elements of Ticktown in it, in that it's not just the monster from Devil's Lake, but there's, you know, other nasty, creepy crawlies around as well. And I've been having a blast writing it, just like I did with Ticktown. I mean, that's for me, that's been the fun of discovering this genre and writing in this genre, is that it's been so much fun to do. Like the writing is actually really fun. And so I wasn't sure if I would find that again once I jumped into my second novel, but I have. And so you know, that's pretty cool. Actually, it's a good way to spend your days.
Yeah, well, that's something your readers can look forward to. So I think we'll wrap the interview up here. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed meeting you and having a chance to talk to you.
Okay, and that's it for this episode of Shadows and Ink. And bye for now.